Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Hey everybody, today we're talking about our August Star of the Month, and I'm really excited about this one. It's an actor that I love. It's an actor that I discovered when I was a kid, and he just stayed with me. He didn't have a long career, but boy, what an impactful career this guy had. If you've ever seen the film noir I Wake Up Screaming from 1941, which starred, of course, Betty Grable, Victor Mature, and Carol Landis, or if you've seen the horror film The Lodger from 1944 with Merrill Oberon and George Sanders, then you likely remember this actor, LAIRD CREGAR. With his sad, dark eyes, his hulking frame, and aristocratic speech, he often played the complex villain tortured by a sinister past or an unrequited love turns into an obsession for him. No one played characters with suppressed anguish or a tortured soul or darkness lingering beneath the surface better than this guy did. He was also a deft comedian when given a chance, as he was in Charlie's Aunt in 1941, where he hilariously portrays this lovesick man who's courting Jack Benny in drag. So there's that. So today we're going to talk about LAIRD CREGAR, his life and his career.
Now, he only made 16 films over the course of his 5 years, but he definitely made an impression. Let's start with where he was born.
He was born Samuel LAIRD CREGAR on July the 28th, 1913, to an upper-middle-class family in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He had 5 older brothers. His father died when he was not quite 3 years old, so his mother went back to work. And according to Cregar's niece, Elizabeth Heyman, and this is the quote, Sam, as he was called then, was different from his brothers. He was moody and tempered with a quiet innocence. He broke rules, he talked back, and he made up outrageous stories that he believed to be the gospel.
Okay, he's a youngest.
I need attention. I'm the youngest.
Are you? Okay.
So it makes you wonder. But this is something he did his entire career, which we're going to hit on a little bit as we go along.
Right.
One of the great stories that he used to tell was that his family was related to John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln.
I guess he wanted to associate himself with a famous actor, or infamous actor, I should say.
But if you're going to lie about who your family's related to, why would you pick John Wilkes Booth?
Yeah, that's a strange one.
But he was an actor.
Well, and the other one that you uncovered in doing a deep dive on him is this next fact, which you read all over the internet, that he went to the prestigious Winchester Academy at age 8 in England, that he was sent there, and that he was bitten by the acting bug after appearing as a page boy with the Stratford-upon-Avon theatrical troupe.
And absolutely every bit of that was made up.
Wow.
And it's so funny. He told the story for so long that it's actually made it into his official biographies.
It has, yeah.
But there's absolutely no factual proof to support any of those claims.
Yeah.
It was just all in his mind, which I think was the device he used as a young kid to escape.
Right.
Because he was this big, heavy-set kid, and I think he had self-esteem issues. So I think he escaped into this wonderful world of his own imagination, and he made these stories up.
And that's exactly why he became a wonderful actor. I'm sure that muscle of imagination was really strong. He also was not really interested in school because he knew that acting was his destiny ever since he saw John Barrymore in the movie Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1920.
Yeah. Around this time when he's kind of figuring himself out and discovering he wants to be an actor, and he was a teenager, he fell for a local girl named Marie Leary.
Okay.
He kind of fell in love with her, but only problem, Marie only had eyes for his brother William.
Oh, that's a problem.
So Marie eventually married William him, which broke Laird's heart. And so to kind of get over it, he hitchhiked out to Hollywood, determined to be an actor.
Right.
And this was the first time he went to Hollywood.
So he gets a job as a day laborer tearing down sets at Paramount. But he soon is laid off. I'm sure he doesn't have very much money.
No.
He's living on the streets, and he's arrested for vagrancy.
Yeah, well, that ships him back to Philadelphia. And the timing of that couldn't have been worse because he goes back to Philadelphia around the same time that his brother William and Marie give birth to their first daughter.
Okay.
I'm sure that must not have been easy for him. However, the daughter, Elizabeth, ended up becoming such a beloved member of Laird's family. He just adored his niece, and he had a particularly close relationship with her his whole life.
Oh, that's good. Upon her birth, he is back there, as you said, and he decides to join the Merchant Marine in 1931. Now, he's only in it for a year, so he's back in Philadelphia
Yeah,
now.
and I couldn't find any evidence of whether he got a medical discharge or whatever it was, but he was only in it for a year. So
Okay.
we don't know why, though.
So he's back in Philadelphia, and he doesn't have a lot of money, right? But there's an amateur theater company called the Hedgerow Players in Pennsylvania. And does he tell them he's a professional actor?
Yeah.
How does he?
He ended up using his powers of persuasion
Yes.
to convince them that he's this professional actor. So, of course, they welcome him with open arms into the troupe, and that's where he spent several years performing on stage, which was his first real acting experience.
Yeah, so he gets some experience in that way, but he really wants to go back out to Hollywood and attend the prestigious Pasadena Playhouse right here in Southern California to study acting.
Yeah, people who know the Pasadena Playhouse know that it used to have one of the greatest training program for actors ever.
Lindsay's mom wanted to apply.
Oh,
and
she
get-
did?
She did.
Oh,
She did. She ended
wow.
up falling in love with his dad instead.
Wow, sliding doors, what could have been?
I know, right?
A lot of famous people studied at the Pasadena Playhouse. Dana Andrews, Jean Arthur, Robert Young, Joel McCrea and Francis D., William Holden, Eve Arden,
Yeah.
Raymond Burr. I mean, it trained some of the best in Hollywood, and I think Cregar knew that, so he wanted to be a part of it.
So I love this, though. Again, using his acting skills. He doesn't have any money, so he persuades the local Rotary Club to sponsor him.
Which is kind of funny because the Rotary Club normally only sponsored like dying kids and kids with polio, but good old
Kind
Laird,
of a Make-A-Wish kind of a situation.
But old
yeah.
Laird, he saw an opportunity and he took it, and he, with again those power of persuasion, he convinced them to pay for his whole tuition at
Right.
Pasadena Playhouse.
Right. Well, you mentioned he's a very big young man. He's 6'3".
Yeah.
Often weighing as much as 300 pounds.
Yeah.
He saw himself as a leading man.
He did. And I have a feeling that this self-image that he held for himself in his mind, because it didn't really match his outward physical self, he always had this internal conflict, which I think plagued him his whole life and will play in later as we tell the story.
Well, and I think this is key. There's a quote that you found of a Pasadena Playhouse teacher who advised him not to lose a pound of weight, but instead to develop a thin man's personality.
Which is ridiculous if you really think about it.
It's very stupid. I don't even know what that means.
I know, and I don't think he thought much of that quote either.
I do think, though, that perhaps what they were trying to say to him was, don't think about your weight. Be who you are.
Yeah.
And don't try to be somebody you're not.
Yeah, and I think in his mind, he's Clark Gable.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
His first really important stage role on the West Coast was at the Pasadena Playhouse in a play called The Great American Family. The play was a critical success, giving Cregar his first taste of the limelight, which he liked a lot.
He was appearing in the play opposite 16-year-old actress Peggy Stewart, who would go on to be a leading lady in Western films at Republic
Yes, absolutely.
Pictures. And according to her, when they appeared in the play together, he was very casually open and even humorous about his homosexuality.
Yeah, and I think he had kind of struggled with being gay his whole life. And I think that was a little bit of his childhood as well, trying to come to terms with that, as
Sure.
well as trying to come to terms with his size and his weight and things like that. So
Sure.
I think it all plays into his psyche.
Right, right. Now, the play moves to San Francisco. It enjoys a successful run there. When it finally closes, Cregar's unemployed.
Yeah, and it is a shock to his system.
Right, right. He can't find a job for 6 months. He's forced to sleep in a friend's car. It's not a good situation.
No, not at all. Talk about suffering for your art.
Right?
He
right.
does. Well, his luck changed in 1940 when, after actively campaigning, he lands the lead in the critically acclaimed play Oscar Wilde at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood.
And he's playing Oscar Wilde, and when you look at his face,
Yes.
you can really see that he could play Oscar Wilde.
Great casting. It really is. The play was a smash hit. It placed him on Hollywood's radar, and one really important Hollywood figure saw him in that play, which made an impact, and that was actress Bette Davis. You know, when she saw him on stage, she was very impressed, and according to the book Laird Cregar, A Hollywood Tragedy by Gregory William Mank, Cregar recalled, and this is the quote, "Betty was kind to me. She visited me backstage after the performance. She insisted I make a test for her for a part in The Letter. That role was unsuited for me and the test was horrible, but no matter. Betty's gesture was that beautiful, inordinate thing that one actor sometimes does for another."
Bette Davis has done that for other actors as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Good on her.
Yeah, good on her.
So, Cregar makes screen tests at MGM and Paramount, but ultimately signs a long-term contract with 20th Century Fox.
Before he signed with Fox, he did get bit parts, very unimportant parts in very unimportant films, but it gave him a little film experience.
Okay.
But once he signed with Fox, you know, they really saw the potential in him, and his very first film there was a good one. He was given the strong supporting role of Paul Muni's sidekick, Gooseberry, in the historical adventure film Hudson Bay.
I love that title. I mean, that name. I love that name.
I love that name, and love the film, which, you know, it stars Gene Tierney and Vincent Price.
And Vincent Price would kind of go on to be in competition with Laird at some points later. We'll
He's
touch
definitely
on that.
peppered in his life throughout, you know, because Vincent Price was also a large man with a very refined speaking voice who would kind of become Cregar's main competition at Fox for those types of roles.
Yeah. So Hudson Bay is a hit, right?
Yeah.
And it leads Cregar to supporting role with Tyrone Power, Rita Hayworth, and Linda Darnell in Blood and Sand in 1940.
Such a good movie, and he's so good in this one.
And then he follows that up with the production you were talking about of Charlie's Aunt, 1940, with Jack Benny and Kay Francis.
Aunt or aunt?
I always say aunt, but it's you could
Caribbean
say
or Caribbean?
Aunt. Yeah. You know what?
Advertisement or advertisement?
Let's call the whole thing off. All right.
Back to work.
We're spicy today.
We are spicy. Okay, so he's played this comedy role, but Fox executives begin to capitalize on Cregar's size, right?
Yes.
And they use that in menacing roles, in villain roles.
Yeah. I mean, he really starts to get typecast here as a villain. And I think another thing that kind of compounded this typecasting was him being a gay man, you know, which was never really confirmed, but I think it was the worst kept secret in Hollywood. Because back in the day, being gay was seen as perverse and deranged, which kind of subconsciously influenced the kind of roles at Fox that he was offered.
Right. Cregar, as we've said, saw himself as a leading man. So this conflict was the beginning of a pretty acrimonious relationship with Laird and Fox Studios.
Yeah, he really fought Fox on the types of roles he was assigned. I mean, he really did not want to always play the big, you know, dark, brooding villain.
But next up for him is a pretty amazing role, I must say, in I Wake Up Screaming, 1941. He's the villain. It's a film noir where he plays Ed Cornell, a police inspector who is obsessed with an ambitious young waitress named Vicky Lynn, played by our wonderful Carol Landis. And talk about obsessed. I mean, when finally at the end,
I love that ending.
Victor Mature walks into the
apartment.
And it's like an homage to Carol Landis.
Oh, it's really creepy. All the photos and flowers and candles. And it's so creepy.
And mentioning Victor Mature, he's the main suspect in this story. He's a sports promoter who, on a dare, tries to turn Vicky into a film star. The film also starred Betty Grable as Vicky's sister, and boy, did they work well together. And did Carol Landis and Betty Grable.
Don't they look like sisters?
They do look like sisters.
Casting.
I wish that somebody would have done something like that.
Yeah, I think they played together in another movie, Moon Over Miami, which is a great musical film.
And so Cregar's performance is the first of many dark roles. I mean, it is a big success for him.
Oh, it's such a nuanced and powerful and complicated performance. You couldn't help but notice him.
Right. So he's a pretty hot commodity at Fox. They decide to screen test him for the lead role in The Man Who Came to Dinner, 1941. But, of course, Monty Woolley, who originated the role on Broadway, can you imagine anyone else playing that role?
No, I can't imagine anyone.
No, and of course, Monty Woolley gets the part.
But what's interesting to me here is that Laird Cregar always played so much older than he actually was.
Yes.
And this is a prime example of that. Had he gotten the role, he would have been playing a much older man than he was.
Right.
But they constantly cast him as older men.
Yeah. So Fox assigns him a really good part in Rings on Her Fingers, 1942. A comedy.
Yes.
Right?
And he's so good in this.
Yeah.
He's so funny. Rings on Her Fingers was a great film. It was directed by Ruben Mamoulian. It starred Gene Tierney and Spring Byington. And Cregar, Gene Tierney, and Spring Byington played this trio of con artists who are out to swindle rich men who, are, of course, are lured in by the beauty of Gene Tierney.
Sure.
And, of course, Henry Fonda being the main one. It's a really funny movie, and he really gets to show some deft comedy skills in this one.
All right. Well, before we continue with the next part of Laird's life, let's give this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the pop quiz question today, of course, we're going to deal with Laird Cregar, which we'll get to this, but he died prematurely at the age of 31. And when he died, he was slated to start a new gothic thriller film for Fox called Dragonwyck. Who ended up playing the role instead?
Great question. We will be right back with the answer and more about Laird Cregar right after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. We all know the term the Rat Pack to describe that group of Hollywood celebrities. Originally, the group centered around Humphrey Bogart and his friends Judy Garland, David Niven, Angie Dickinson, talent agent Swifty Lazar, and restaurateur Mike Romanoff, and of course, Frank Sinatra. Well, these days, the Rat Pack generally refers to Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, Sinatra being the only member who'd been there from the beginning. But did you ever wonder who came up with that name, the Rat Pack? Well, according to Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall's son, Stephen, the term originated when Lauren Bacall walked in on his father, Humphrey Bogart, and the rest of the group during a particularly drunken weekend in Las Vegas. She told the disheveled group, "You guys look like a damn rat pack." They found it hilarious, and when she repeated the phrase a few days later, it stuck. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. We're excited to get back to Laird Cregar, but before we do, I wanted to give a big shout out to our listener of the week, Greg Watson. Greg has been writing us and giving us suggestions, and he really would love to see Dan Duryea as one of our stars of the month.
Oh, we love Dan Duryea.
We love Dan Duryea. So thank you, Greg, and thanks for checking us out.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
Where we left off with Laird's career, he is about to be loaned to Paramount Pictures to appear as the villainous Willard Gates in This Gun for Hire, proving no match for Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. That's in 1942.
Yeah, because I think his career at this point is really kicking into gear, and other studios are borrowing him because they see the potential of him.
And the people that he's playing opposite are...
Yeah, he's playing with every major star in Hollywood. Yep. His next film was a really great film called 10 Gentlemen from West Point, 1942, directed by the great Henry Hathaway. It co-starred George Montgomery and Maureen O'Hara. And he portrays this tough disciplinarian major who takes over West Point.
Again, playing somebody older than who he actually was.
Much older than he was, yeah.
He's also reunited in his next film, again with Maureen O'Hara and Tyrone Power, in the swashbuckling adventure film, The Black Swan.
Yeah, great
1942.
Great movie. And it's fun to see Laird Cregar in all the kind of piratey,
Who doesn't like a good piratey outfit?
The pirate shirts and the whole shabam. It's really, really fun.
Puffy sleeves. All right, so director Ernst Lubitsch gave Cregar a role that was a really good change of pace for him in Heaven Can Wait, the original Heaven Can Wait, 1943. He's cast as His Excellency.
Well, he's basically playing Satan.
Right. Well, yeah, so it's not quite as much of a...
But it's funny and it's fun.
It's fun, yeah.
Lighthearted.
That's with Gene Tierney and Don Amici.
Yeah, and he sort of bookends the movie. He starts it out where an aged Don Amici has kind of been sent down to hell to try to get entrance because he wants in.
Right.
And he has to go before His Excellency, Laird Cregar.
Right.
And Laird Cregar says first, you've got to kind of examine your life to see what you've done, to see if you deserve to be in hell.
Yes, right.
And then that's where the movie plays out, and then he bookends it on the end.
I love it, too, that he followed that up because it's just showing the diversity of his range. He follows it up with the musical Hello, Frisco, Hello with Alice Faye and John Payne.
I know you don't really think of Laird Cregar with Alice Faye in a musical.
No.
His star was definitely on the rise. He wasn't playing the leading man as he always imagined he would, but he usually had the most interesting role in any film.
I think that's such an interesting point. I think, especially when you're a young actor, you feel like that leading lady or that leading man, sometimes those roles are just kind of boring.
Yeah.
Whereas he was getting to play something really meaty and interesting.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, too, because as we all know, character actors will have longevity.
Yes, you're going to work your whole life.
And unfortunately, he didn't get to because of his premature death, but I think he was on his way to a very long, healthy career.
Right. Now, this next role, this is The Lodger, 1945. He's playing Jack the Ripper.
Yes, maybe or maybe not Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, true. They don't call him Jack the Ripper, but he definitely has some interesting stuff happening. Well, interesting isn't quite the right word. Right.
Yes.
So
homicidal, maybe.
Yeah, homicidal is a better word. So in the film, he has a romantic relationship with Merle Oberon. Mm-hmm. And he decides that he's going to crash diet for this part.
Yeah.
Because he's wanting to give off this romantic leading man vibe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the film is a big hit, but he's growing continually frustrated by having to play these hulking villains, right?
Yeah. Which I think inspired him to continue this terrible trend of crash dieting. I mean, he would just yo-yo diet. You know, he would lose, he would gain, he would lose 100, he would gain 100.
Yes.
Very bad because it was in a very short period of time.
Right.
And this put kind of a great strain on his mind and his body.
Right. And he continues doing that for his next picture, Hanover Square in 1945. I have to say, on a side note, I have a very dear friend who this kind of yo-yo dieting back and forth is perhaps what caused his untimely early death. So it's a thing, even now.
It's a thing, I know, I tell you. Well, Hanover Square ended up being a major film for Laird Cregar. He played this demented pianist, George Bone, who was this murderous amnesiac composer who's seduced by this trampy singer played by Linda Darnell.
Linda Darnell, she's playing a trampy singer.
Oh, she was the best at playing trampy singers and saloon girls and such.
Right. Well, and this is the first time that he receives top billing, right?
Yeah.
One of his most memorable films.
It was, and sadly, it was his last movie. In December 1944, he underwent surgery to repair a ruptured hernia. During the operation, his heart, which was already weakened from this harsh dieting, gave out, and Cregar suffered a massive coronary.
Wow. He passed away on December 9th, 1944, at the age of 31, just on the verge of real stardom. And his mother was at his bedside.
Yeah. And you know, Hanover Square was released 2 months later after he passed away, and it was a huge hit. I mean, it's just a shame. I mean, he really was on the brink of major stardom when he died.
Do we know, was he using amphetamines to diet? Do we have any idea what the kinds of things?
Nobody really went into what he was doing to his body.
I just know
I have a feeling it was amphetamines.
Yeah, because losing weight back in those days was very different.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, even the 60s and 70s, women were taking amphetamines.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. So he has passed away, God rest his soul. 20th Century Fox, who has constantly had this kind of animosity between the powers that be and Laird, they, no surprise for a studio, right?
No shocker.
They're not
there.
exactly warm with a nice sympathy card.
Right. I don't think there was a bouquet of flowers sent.
Right. You were able to find inter-office correspondence, a memo from Lou Schreiber to George Wasson, both in the Fox legal department. What did Schreiber write?
Well, this is perfect. Schreiber wrote, "The Laird Cregar contract is to be officially closed as of the night of December 9th.
Wow.
Talk about ice cold.
They were not going to pay 1 penny more.
Nope. They were done with him.
That's just amazing.
Cregar's funeral was held on December the 13th, 1944, and pallbearers included actors Keenan Wynn and Tom Neal, And the eulogy, get this, I love this, was given by Vincent Price, his old rival / friend
Right.
and co-star in Hudson's Bay.
Right.
He gave the eulogy.
Yeah. And he's interred in Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, not too far from where our studio is right now. Have
Very
you been
close.
to his grave?
I have not been to his grave, but
Okay.
it's on my list.
Okay.
Because, I love a good cemetery.
I know. We, who doesn't? We went to them as kids and had a great time.
Totally.
My mom took us.
Oh, we lived across the street from a cemetery.
Okay.
It was just part of our childhood.
Wow.
Looking back at Laird Cregar, it's truly a tragedy that his desire to be thin brought on this ultimate doom for him. And it just didn't have to be that way. I think about the career path of, say, Raymond Burr. He was another closeted gay, heavyset actor, but rather than fight against his weight, Burr used it to his advantage in creating complex characters. And as we all know, he went on to a brilliant career. It makes me sad to think about what could have been for Laird Cregar had he just had some self-love and accepted himself.
Yeah. And nowadays, thankfully, this whole idea of body shaming is part of our conversation.
Yeah.
And women and men are able, at least a little bit more than they were, I'm sure there's some of it still going on, to be who they are and not worry about that.
And isn't that a wonderful place to be?
It really is.
Well,
It really
if
is.
you don't know Laird Cregar, please check out some of his movies. He was just this most gifted, unique actor with such great depth.
Steve, what would be, if you had one or two to pick out, what would you say?
I Wake Up Screaming, 1,000%.
Yeah.
Such a great movie.
And then
such
you also get to see Carol Landis.
And you get to see Caroline and Betty Grable
And
and
Betty
Victor
Grable.
Mature, I
Yeah.
tell you. And my second one, definitely The Lodger.
Yeah.
He is so chilling and eerie and menacing and wonderful in that movie.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth checking out.
If I'm not mistaken, one or both of those are available on YouTube free and probably other streaming services as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's get the answer to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
Well, the question was, when Laird Cregar died prematurely at age 31, he was slated to start a new movie for Fox, Dragonwyck, which went on to be a huge hit with Gene Tierney. Who played the role that he was going to take on?
Who played the role?
Well, it all ties back in. It was his good old buddy / rival, Vincent Price.
I wondered about that.
Old Vincent.
All right.
Pinched hit for Laird.
I haven't seen that film. I'm going to add it to my list.
Such a good movie. Mildred Natwick, who we've talked about before on the show, she's also in it.
And she needs an episode, Mildred.
Yeah,
she
she
needs
needs
her
her
own
own.
episode, yeah.
Star of the month.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for spending this time with us. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review and follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
And please feel free to email us with any questions or comments. We can be reached at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. And tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor, Lindsay Schnebley. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.